in to eat the dust, the dust of Baja California.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Tom and Joe Show. I'm Joe, introducing myself and messing up all the order. And say hi, Tom.
Hi.
Okay, there. Getting the intros out of the way because apparently in our Eden of the East show we did not introduce ourselves.
You may have wondered who we were in that episode. We were us.
Yeah, who could these people possibly be in the Tom and Joe Show? We may never know. But in any case, this episode we're doing the musical episode, which just happens to be my choice. And we are doing Decks and Drums and Rock and Roll by the Propellerheads. And probably one of the greatest single albums by a band that only released a single album.
So far.
So far.
So far.
Yes.
We wait with bated breath for the return of the Propellerheads.
So is Entertainment Weekly. I remember when this came out, and it's like, this was so Entertainment Weekly's jam. And then every year they was just like, oh yeah, the Propellerheads are in the studio working on another album. And then another year came by, and then another year came by. And it was like 2005 before they did this. And then they just eventually stopped. So their second album is now apparently Chinese Democracy, or, Duke Nukem Forever, or whatever you would like to choose.
Yeah. But what an album Decks, Drums and Rock and Roll is, because this is sort of, it turns up in a remarkable, the singles and some of the tracks on this turn up in a remarkable number of places, considering this was pretty much a one and done band. This is they ended up in The Matrix with the tracks. With the track Spy Break, they ended up in Austin Powers. They ended up in a Bond film. Considering this is a band that did one album and a couple of singles, they are remarkable. Their footprint is remarkably big.
Yeah, they were the official soundtrack from 1997 to 1999, because I had most of the soundtracks these guys were on, and it's just like I even have memories of stuff they were also on. I think the story behind that is the American version, which we'll get into the differences between versions, because I thought the American version was the one that was just everyone had, because everything's fit so well and everything works so well, but apparently that was not the version.
This is the case of one of those strange albums where the old 1950s and 1960s albums, you get a different version in the UK to the rest of the world.
Yes, and but they were on an indie label in Great Britain, I believe,
yep.
And then in America they were picked up by DreamWorks Audio when they were first starting, because this was when DreamWorks was starting to have dreams. My ADHD using the same word in the same sentence.
I mean, it's partly run by David Geffen, which is like,
yeah, they had ambitions of being this giant multimedia conglomerate. So they had DreamWorks Records on top of having DreamWorks SKG, which was their film division. So they had, and I believe they had DreamWorks Games and all that other vertically integrated shit. So they had, and Propellerheads were one of the first ones, so naturally they showed up in a bunch of random films and advertising for films. There's the list of films they were in, and then there was the unofficial stuff they had on the side. Like Coming to Getcha was in the TV promos for Mouse Hunt, which was DreamWorks' first children's comedy. So it was a very forgotten movie starring Nathan Lane and apparently Christopher Walken eventually. And they were trying to rid this house of a mouse. So, and this is one of those movies where I swear to God, the guy who played House MD, Hugh Laurie, was in it, but he wasn't. But because he was in all of these random '90s movies as a henchman or a person who's in it for 5 minutes, like he's in the Man in the Iron Mask or the 100 live action 101 Dalmatians. So, but I keep thinking Hugh Laurie is in one of those roles. He's not in this movie, so that's the only thing I remember about Mouse Hunt is that the Propellerheads were in the promotional audio for it, and I thought Hugh Laurie was in it, but he wasn't. So
Yeah.
that tells you how bad DreamWorks' early lineup was. But back to the music. So, I think you did a little more research, even though this was my choice. You can just tell the because what I have is how I was introduced to them, less than what I have as to how they were formed as a band. And you're kind of the one who's on top of all the band stuff. So maybe you can give an introduction to how the basic band information.
Well, this is the thing. There's not much information on these guys compared to, like, obviously our last episode where we went about Weezer, and Weezer obviously are well documented. You know, everyone is. There is, like, no information on these guys. They come from Bath in the United Kingdom. The band was formed in 1995. They released an EP called Dive in 1996 through their UK label Wall of Sound. They then contribute a remix of On Her Majesty's Secret Service, which obviously appears on Decks and Drums and Rock and Roll and is the longest track on the record. They then collaborate with Arnold, who at that point, David Arnold, who was at that point the composer for the Bond films and was up until Casino Royale. A track called Backseat Drivers to Tomorrow Another Dies. They then do History Repeating with, again, Bond collaborator Shirley Bassey. And then they released this album in 1998. And there's the DreamWorks version, obviously, as we'll come on to talk about, has a couple of collaborators from American hip hop artists De La Soul and the Jungle Brothers, and then it obviously gets used in The Matrix, and then they sort of disappear. And apparently they tour at some point, trying to find live versions of anything for the Propellerheads is difficult. There's, like, on YouTube, I think there is about 4 or 5 live performances, one of which is basically excerpts from one appearance they did for a New York radio station. Bang On, which is obviously also from this track. You will hear this sort of me go on that basically there's a number of tracks that get used which have appeared on this album. Bang On again gets used up in Wipeout 64. And then they end up on the Lost of Space soundtrack.
Yeah, I had that soundtrack. It's actually not bad.
No, the soundtrack's
it's
just attached to Lost in Space.
The thing is, the Lost in Space soundtrack is not fitting for the movie it's in. It has, like, a lot of the '90s, dance and electronica and stuff, and it's just like there's the song for Penny by Death in Vegas, of all people.
Yeah.
And it's just this hardcore electronic song.
For a small girl.
That has Robbie the Robot, like, threatening to murder you. And that's the song for Penny, who is the 15-year-old girl that is in this movie. And it's like, I don't know how I'm supposed to feel about this.
Yeah.
But,
yeah, so...
But it was in... they were everywhere once, like, they got over here. And, like, once they were in Bond, like, they had a... Like you said, they had a track on Tomorrow Never Dies, like Backseat Driver, where they did that with David Arnold. They were on the There's Something About Mary soundtrack with History Repeating. Bang On was on the Lost in Space soundtrack. And Spy Break was in The Matrix. And then it was so much... They were in...
Ubiquitous.
Stuff, and then this random track that they had that wasn't on the album was in the second Austin Powers movie. And it was also apparently... the theme to a BBC show for a bit, and that's all the promotional stuff I have forgotten since the 90s because it is all getting to be 25 years since that happened, and dear God, it shouldn't be that long, but it is.
Yeah, and then they release as part of the 10th birthday of Wall of Sound a sort of one of the gentlemen from Propellerheads. So the Propellerheads are two gentlemen. They are Will Wright, who's essentially the sort of the samples guy, and Alex Gifford, who's the other guy. And at that point, sort of basically, they do some mixes for their company, including a new track by the Propellerheads featuring a Brooklyn writer, Livingston Johnson, and then they drop off the edge of the earth. That's it.
Yep.
Nothing.
That's it.
That's it.
I remember like reading an article where they said the Propellerheads were officially kaput, where they just said they, had all these tracks, but the thing is the music stage changed. I don't know if it was 9/11, but 9/11 was kind of the impromptu where everything changed from everything's super fun to whatever new metal and
existential angst.
Dirty South rap was, and it moved sonically to that, and moved away from this. Like even like DJ Shadow did a Dirty South album at that point in time, like The Outsider, which we may get into at some point in time. But they felt that their stuff was passe and they couldn't make an album out of it, and they couldn't release it and feel like they were being successful because it would just be this old and they hadn't evolved, which I think they still would have had room to work, but that's just me. So, they decided to, call it dead because, they didn't feel they were necessary anymore. So that's the impression I got. But keep in mind, this is like reading 15-year-old magazine articles, and I don't have any of it on the internet, and which is the sad thing about print media is you can't, copying it word for word by just typing is hard, and just scanning it doesn't do people a whole lot of good unless you're one of the Twitter people who just likes, screenshots everything. But how I got introduced was through the Propellerheads was a little weird, even though I was a hardcore Bond fan during the time. I'd, watched GoldenEye and was like totally into it, and then I got into everything else. But there was an MTV show called 12 Angry Viewers, and it was one where every week they would have like 5 days where they would get 10 random slobs off the street, have them review 5 music videos or however many they had, and then they would pick the best one of the day and then pick the best one of the week. The Propellerheads were on there, and it was their breakout song Over Here, History Repeating, and it was one of my favorite music videos of all time. So History Repeating, it's just, the music video is Shirley Bassey, and they are on this BBC show for, music like Top of the Pops or whatever. And there's like this announcer, and it's supposed to be like the 60s or something like that, but they're still in black and white. And they talk about how there's these new people called DJs, and it's sweeping the nation. And is it a fresh breath of fresh air into music, or is it, just a copy? So here you can decide for yourself. So they do this music video, and it is History Repeating is a very classy, very upbeat. It's trying to, mimic the 60s, but it's adds a lot of record scratches and, a lot of DJ work and a lot of loops and stuff like that. So they have Shirley Bassey and, both of the Propellerheads are in the back doing their thing. And then eventually all of the camera people and all the people on stage start like dancing around, and then one of the stage hands starts break dancing, and it's just, and then I think the stage director's like, what? And one of the camera people just starts getting their groove on, and it's a very fun music video, and it was their pick of the week, and it was almost a unanimous choice, except for the one person on MTV who was like, the video's in black and white. I don't like black and white. And so they chose something else. So it was an 11-1 choice because the music video was in black and white, not because they didn't like the song. And then I got into that, and it's like, oh, hey, Shirley Bassey? And it's like, and then I so ran out and got the album. And then it just went from there. And then I just started recognizing them everywhere because when you're a teenager, that's the point of your life where you start absorbing every media around you, regardless of whether it's good or not. So I watched about every movie at the time, and I watched, and you tried to listen to everything. So, I just kept hearing them. It's like, hey, that's a Propellerheads, and then there's everybody else, and it's just like, who cares? So that's the story about how I got into it, and then I started recognizing them everywhere, and then anxiously awaited their second album, which never came. So, on that note, we should probably talk about the album proper.
Yeah, I think we should. So, obviously, this is where we get into our very interesting discussion about sort of the two different versions, because there is the version in the UK and there's the version everywhere else. And they're mostly the same track listing, but for basically two changes. So, on the UK version, you have between Take California and Velvet Pants, which is sort of a very funky sort of rock track, and Take California is almost like the blueprint of what is on the rest of the album. You have Echo and Bounce, and Echo and Bounce is honestly probably the weakest track on the British version. It is a little bit of a sort of like if the Propellerheads, because the Propellerheads sound obviously does rely on sort of looping and turntablism, obviously backed up with sort of live percussion, etc. stuff. Echo and Bounce sort of takes the loops to a sort of a rather over the top extent, I think.
Yeah, it feels like a prototype for a song rather than a song, and then it's only like when the voices come in and like say echo and bounce over and over again that it like goes anywhere. But for a long part of the runtime, it's just this same loop over and over, and they try to do it what they can, but it's kind of a weak.
Yeah.
Like you said, it's a very weak song. But in the American version, it just goes straight from Take California and goes right into Velvet Pants. And the weird thing is, it feels like that's originally how it was supposed to go, or maybe they just remixed it for the American version, because like there's a stop right at the end of Take California, and then there's a turntable scratch that leads right, and it's a perfect like segue to Velvet Pants. And I looked at the 20th anniversary printing of Propellerheads, which had the original order and stuff like that, and there is still that bridge that is clearly between the both songs, and they put Echo and Bounce right in the middle of it, so it feels like Velvet Pants starts like being like there was a half note cut off. So
no, I'd agree with that.
So it's very weird, and also when you get into the later on in the album, there's the song "Oh Yeah," which in the British version it's an instrumental. In the American version, there is the song 360 "Oh Yeah," which adds "De La Soul," and that is the version we got on the album. And I think it's a better fit because before that we had like so many instrumentals. I mean, I know this is leading into it was leading into History Repeating, which is obviously the centerpiece of the album, but after let me get the playlist in front of me, but
yeah, it's quite
so we have Take California, which is a sample heavy dance song. Then we have Echo and Bounce, which is kind of a
mess.
It has samples. it's kind of a transition song, but it's a transition song that lasts 5 minutes. And then we have Velvet Pants, which is another sample-heavy dance song. And then we have Better, which is a transition. And then it fits that 360 oh yeah, or 360 degrees oh yeah would be there. And because otherwise Better feels like it's transitioning into another instrumental, which doesn't do a whole lot.
And I'd agree with that, because there's a lot of a lot of the tracks on this do feel like, they are the thing is with the Propellerhead style is it is quite in places sparse, and it's like it's a very much sort of like, it'll be a few loops, a live drum kit, and it is a live drum kit on most of the tracks. Levels of layers of samples, but in some places it really does, and History Repeating I think is the track that shows it best, is you put a voice on top of that, it works wonders. And I think definitely 360 oh yeah is the other really good example of that.
Yeah. And the last thing they added on it is after Spy Break there's one last song, and they put You Want It Back with the Jungle Brothers, and it is absolutely the best way to end that album. And it is obviously a killer track, and it's like after Spy Break it's a nice, you have, let's see here, after History Repeating you have Winning Style, which is heavy sample heavy dance track, and then you have Bang On, which is a really, I wouldn't call it a dance track because it is super heavy. And then you have A Number of Microphones, which is a beatboxing transition, and then you have On Majesty's Secret Service, which is
long.
It is long, but it is an awesome, one of the best songs of the album.
Yeah.
And you have Bigger, which is another transition, and then Coming and Get You in Spy Break. And so we have like Winning Style to Spy Break, which are like all sample heavy, no vocals or instrumentals. So it feels like there's an emptiness where they do songs with actual artists and lyrics, and it feels like that in the UK version there's just this emptiness in some of the parts of it.
Definitely.
These songs fill in the emptiness, and it's pretty damn close to a perfect album in the American version.
Yeah.
But I say that, and it's because how I experienced it. It's like when you're playing a 90s role-playing game, and they're like, I'm only saying this because I just played Grandia recently, and I cannot imagine Grandia without its extremely cheesy, terrible voice acting. But obviously it is not ideal. It's just how I experienced it, and I can't, and that's me. But
yeah, that's how you experience media, and you go, fine, okay, you take it, warts and all. Mm-hmm. So let's go through this sort of track by track, I think, as we did with the last one. So Take California is probably one of the best tracks on this album, because it starts out and it really does very much sort of set this sort of this is the blueprint. So basically, Propellerheads are a genre music called big beat. Big beat was really sort of big in the sort of the mid 90s to the 2000s, and goes off a cliff in 2001. For basically, a lot of this stuff is once you've heard one album by The Prodigy, one album by the Chemical Brothers, one album by Propellerheads, it does very much sort of, you get a lot of bands, and I think sort of Propellerheads sort of, their one and done thing. Well, you've done your one album, do you need to recycle this? Because I feel with sort of some of the stuff, like, some of the things in the genre alongside, The Prodigy, Fatboy Slim, etc., they either go after this period through a period of reinvention, essentially, with particularly, Fatboy Slim hasn't done a recorded album with the exception of sort of a collaboration with Brian Eno since the mid 2000s, and the Prodigy obviously, unfortunately, are now defunct. But
Yeah.
but obviously, it does very much sound the same. And by that point in the end of the 90s, dance music is going in a different direction. It's now becoming more sort of darker, and there is and obviously the thing is with Decks and Drums and Rock and Roll, it is a very big, happy. It is mostly a very big sort of dancey record. And Take California.
And I think it filled kind of a gap because the big ones at the time, like Prodigy and Chemical Brothers and stuff like that, there was kind of a threatening edge because obviously Chemical Brothers is like drugs, and then you have the Prodigy, which one of their big songs was "Smack My Bitch Up." That is the song title.
Yep.
But these were like, it's like when they do the brave things in the Matrix, and like normal people like have almost an allergic reaction to them because like this is this weird other culture that they aren't a part of. And then we have the Propellerheads, and this is absolutely like culture at the time. Like everything has a 20-year cycle or 30-year cycle, I should say. So the 60s were coming back, 60s and 70s were coming back in the 90s, and that's what they were playing off of here. And it was fun, and you could play it in the background at a party, or you could like listen to it. And it's like, if you're listening to it in a car and you like drive up to somebody, you wouldn't need to turn it down because "Smack My Bitch Up" is on, and that's that's half the lyrics of the song. And if we're single and a loser like me, you don't want to come up with that cute lady who's not going to like you, but she might like you.
Yeah.
But anyway, back to Take California.
So yeah, Take California, I think also sort of, because it starts with this sample. I think it is of Nixon or Nixon, and I think it's definitely sort of late 60s, early 70s, and it's sort of there is a sense of fun to the Propellerheads. That their name is taken from sort of the stereotypical sort of geek hat with the sort of the little, it was a stereotypical term for geeks in general, but particularly for the little sort of hat of sort of stereotypical cartoons with a propeller on top.
Yeah.
And there is a sense of it's quite goofy in places, but obviously Take California starts with this sample of if you can take anything away from this trip, take California. And it's sort of like
yeah they kind of have a tongue-in-cheek sense of humor about themselves, where they know their samples are kind of getting old, and they know that the song kind of, so in the middle, towards the end, they start making fun of like how much it's repeating or something like that, or they just put in jokes in the middle where the samples are talking to each other and all of that,
which you then see on the next track, Velvet Pants. And Velvet Pants is, I think Velvet Pants is certainly the sort of the one that actually that has like the biggest rock influence. It does feel like you stick another couple of guitars on there, and that's probably a 70s sort of funk. And there is a very much an influence of sort of funk music on there, and there's a lot more groove than compared to some of their contemporaries. It is that very 70s sort of funky, sort of James Brownie sort of thing, particularly with how they use the drums on the record.
Yeah. And it also kind of has like, it tries to be groovy because the sentence "it's groovy," I guess, is repeated many times. So, and there's a story in it where it's about these girls or women who go to this party, and one of them starts obsessing with this guy who's wearing velvet pants, and there's the girl on the side who is not really digging the party, and it's just like, it's groovy, I guess. And then eventually they just get tired of this girl talking about the guy's velvet pants, So it's just like, it's all he talks about. So it's
Yeah.
very weird for, a dance song, which is just, repeated samples and that kind, and, loops to kind of have a story in it, but
But it's
it's
there.
it's weird and it's funny and it's enjoyable. It's one of my favorite songs off
Yeah.
the album.
Yeah. But no,
It's not a single, but it is definitely a sign that the album has kicked in and it's ready to go.
and I think that is something. One of the things that, as you said, there isn't really, with the exception of Echo and Bouncers, obviously is missing off the DreamWorks version. There's not really a weak track. There's some tracks that sort of take a little bit longer to get to an idea than sort of is entirely necessary in places, or outstays its welcome a little bit, but it's sort of a very big party album, and sort of Better is sort of an interesting track because it then goes to sort of really tongue-in-cheek.
Mm-hmm.
And you can sort of have the sample, and obviously Better and Bigger, which comes obviously much later on the album, sort of do seem like these two little gaps in the album, little breathing spaces.
Sorry.
And then you get 360 Oh Yeah, which obviously we've discussed at some great, but Della Soul is always a win. Della Soul turn up on your track will be improved. Damon Albarn knows all about this.
Apparently the Propellerheads worked on a De La Soul album after this, and a lot of what they did after this album was help other people's albums, and then they showed up on their albums. So it's very interesting just hearing the instrumental version. Oh yeah, but again, this is what I'm used to, but it feels like there should be something here.
Yeah.
But you're just hearing, the instrumental of the song, and then there's the skateboard noises, and there's like random stops in the middle of it. Like, what is it stopping?
Yeah, it does feel very much like they for the UK version they built it and they go, okay, we've got this. Oh, okay, but we would really like somebody on this because it would be really nice to have something playing off against that. And obviously, what they must have done is I get the feeling with the American version is more what they actually wanted, particularly with 360 Oh Yeah, where they can go, okay, De La Soul, come over here. Okay, De La Soul, do you want to rap on our track? Okay, done, brilliant. And obviously
it's the lyrics are okay. They're just usual how great we are lyrics, but it's a fun song, and the Propellerheads have fun with it. Like there's there's the sample in the middle. It's like what was it? It's like how they're this famous and then they still get, "Great Scott, are you a creep? Seems like you have a mouth full of gold." And then the rapper says, "Records. Sorry about that. Platinum soon to come." So it's
and
it's kind of that fun.
And I think De La Soul is a perfect match for the Propellerheads. They both have this sort of and De La Soul have obviously been around since the early mid '80s in terms of rap. It's a very clever It's a very clever sort of match there, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And then we get Shirley Bassey.
Sorry.
And then we get Shirley Bassey.
Shirley Bassey, and I just love this song. This is one of my favorite songs ever, and it's just all great.
And again, it would not work without Shirley Bassey. That song has to have Shirley Bassey on. It doesn't work otherwise. And it's interesting because I think this is one of the few tracks that has a sort of an afterlife, because I believe Shirley Bassey does still do this track live, as far as I'm aware.
Would imagine so.
Yeah.
I mean, I haven't watched a lot of Shirley Bassey concert stuff. My experience with her is strictly just Bond themes in this, but. Yeah, I would not be surprised because, this is hit single. Yeah. This has hit single written all over it, and it is just gets into your head, and it just stays with you forever, like, the great songs do, like Uptown Funk does.
Yeah, it's got that same
like that.
And I think
it's just
I think the genius of it is it you know, this could have come out in the 70s. You know, this is basically, you know, you've got to remember a lot of this hip hop and a lot of turntablism stuff is very much sort of, you know, it's, you know, it's people going through, as DJ Shadow do, as a lot of people do, these big old crates, a sort of 70s funk, 70s beat, you know, sort of stuff like James Brown, you know, Parliament Funkadelic, and basically building things out of it. And you know, particularly you see this particularly in the big beat movement, and you see obviously perhaps the greatest proponent of the genre, Fatboy Slim, who sort of builds these incredibly dense tracks from sort of basically snippets of other things. And it's sort of, there is a timeless quality to history repeating, even compared to the rest of the album.
Because you can just put this on anywhere and it's like, oh yeah, this is a jam. And, you know, Shirley Bassey carries it, and it's required because the lyrics are basically about how there are all these new fads and stuff, but, you know, everything is just old, which fits absolutely because they use a lot of 60s and 70s samples, and that's, you know, how they built the base of, you know, their work.
Yeah.
So,
and she was there.
And she was there when that happened, so she, you know, has an authority to, you know, it's all just a little bit of history repeating. So, but you know, it's it's not talking down at you. It's just like it's, you know, this is all old, but it's all super fun anyway, and let's just enjoy it and just get in the groove. And
so this was actually Shirley Bassey's first top 10 hit in the US for about 30 years.
Oh, I don't doubt it. Like, I think the last thing she did that would have even approached it was the theme to Moonraker, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
And I don't know how well that went, but how well the Bond themes do on the charts is a really weird thing. And I have a booklet on it that says how well they did, and I don't think Moonraker quite really did that much, but it's kind of weird because the biggest hits are the ones you wouldn't expect. I mean, except for maybe Duran Duran's A View to a Kill. But like one of the biggest hits before like the modern era, where all the Bond themes immediately become hits, and they're in the US and they immediately win the Oscar for best song, no matter how good they are.
In the Post to You, Billy.
But
yeah, no.
One of the biggest ones was Aha's "In the Living Daylights."
I mean, it's the heart. I mean, it's the heart, but yeah, I guess honestly, it's like, really.
Which is a better song than people give it credit for, but it's still, nobody would call it their favorite Bond theme. So
no. And then back to decks and drums.
Drums, because I get onto way too many asides. It's what my ADHD does, and I'm sorry.
That's right.
It connects everything. But
Winning Style, I think, has the problem that it comes straight after Shirley Bassey.
Yeah.
I'm trying to remember anything about it.
Yeah, it just, I remember the beat. It's like do 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 do, and it just keeps repeating that. And then there's, you know, kind of some samples.
Yeah, I feel like you have to have like this track between, you know, History Repeating and Bang On, because obviously first they're two singles, and secondly, you know, you cannot go straight from Shirley Bassey to Bang On.
Because Bang On is loud, and it is full force, and it's in your face, and I wouldn't even call it a dance track. No. It's just, you know, them going, you know,
full tilt,
just full out, punching you right in the face with noise. I mean, it's not quite noise, obviously. It's very organized and very, you know, reasonably well done. But it is definitely the song where I can, you know, flip past it because I'm not in the mood for it.
Yeah, it's very much the Marmite track on it. It is like, you know, it's basically a rock track that just happens to have breakbeats on it, because it's got this very pronounced, very high up in the mix sort of guitar noise. It's sort of basically sliding up and down the fretboard, doing this sort of slightly crazed sort of 60s twang guitar thing, but obviously run through a lot of effects pedals, and it's sort of it's almost slightly manic. It's sort of like, compared to the rest of the record, which is fairly, laid back and fairly on the groove. This is just like, okay, we're gonna make this now. And
And then,
ironically, this is actually how I got into the Propellerheads, because Bang On was on basically a compilation thing called Y2K Beat the Clock, which was on Columbia in the UK. And basically what it is it's a mix thing done for the 2000s, because hey, the 2000s, which was, the year 2000, when we were all worried about the internet killing us all. And it has the Rockefeller Skank, Out of
oh yes.
Space, Bang On, Born Slippy. It's got like
So,
it's pretty much, a beginner's guide.
all the music I was into.
Yeah, it's sort of a beginner's guide to here is electronic music in the late 90s. And on that is obviously Bang On, and Bang On is great, and Bang On has a sort of randomly carrying on the sort of slightly goofy tongue-in-cheek samples, has a sample from the Gene Wilder Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, because why not?
Mm-hmm.
And then
And it was on the soundtrack to Lost in Space, as we previously mentioned.
where it does not fit.
Those albums and the soundtrack albums were the ones that were my introduction to a lot of electronic, because they were, as I found out, a lot of soundtracks are handled by British people, and they put a lot of British stuff on it. So even like the big ones like Warner Brothers, they will, on their big Batman and Robin, they will slip Underworld under the door or something like that.
Yeah.
Then you have the Saint soundtrack, which is, a whole bunch of Underworld, Duran Duran when they were in their 90s, mixing with, more, I don't want to say experimental, but they sounded more like a 90s post-grunge band that was mixing with electronic stuff. But that was my introduction to a lot of stuff.
Yeah. This is before you even get into the complete insanity that is the Shrek soundtracks. It's like okay, you want to put Eels, Damien Rice, Nick Cave, and Smash Mouth on one soundtrack. Okay, then.
The Shrek kind of caught the U.S. at a weird time where it didn't know what it was going to be. I can't remember when exactly Shrek came out. I worked as a theater attendant when Shrek came out, and I'm trying to get like 2001.
Yeah.
Okay, so this was just before 9/11. So we knew something was changing. We just didn't know what. And then that happened, and then that decided for us. So
yeah.
It's
very zeitgeist in a strange.
It was very weird times, because it's like, okay, we're done with this, super fun empty stuff.
Yeah.
And then we didn't know what we were doing next.
Yeah. But it's sort of it's interesting that sort of then you get Bang On, or you get a number of microphones, which, as we previously said, is beatboxing, and then you have the Goliath that is on Her Majesty's Secret Service, and I think this might be my favorite track by them, because it's just got this.
I don't doubt it.
It
is
huge.
really damn good.
So
and this was originally made for when David Arnold took over. He had like Shake and Stir, the David Arnold 007 project, which brought a bunch of artists together to do remixes of either Bond themes or Bond soundtracks, or John Barry cuts. Like Left Field did Spacewalk instead of like Moonraker or a Bond theme, so they came out of left field and did that.
Oh boy, Left Field.
My jokes. I have the jokes.
The band that nearly destroyed a building.
Mm-hmm. And then they had Pulp and Iggy Pop and all of that stuff. And then their Propellerheads like right in the middle, with On Her Majesty's Secret Service, and it's the best one off that one because On Her Majesty's Secret Service is just a damn good song to begin with. It is one of the few Bond themes that is just an instrumental, and it didn't need anything else. It didn't need like Tom Jones coming on here and singing a bunch of nonsense about how he's on Her Majesty's Secret Service, because it just has that hard driving, main theme that pushes you, and it pushes through a really intense movie at times.
Yeah, and it's bolted on to this absolute Goliath of a beat. Which is, it is like, I used to play a lot of Grand Theft Auto, and this would be my, I'm being chased by the police music. It would just go, right, that's going on, turn it up, go as fast as possible. This is like, if anyone wants to sort of go, find me one piece of music which epitomizes Bond, apart from the main theme, it's this.
Yeah.
Because it captures everything. It captures everything. It captures, the mystery, the mystique of Bond. It captures the pure sort of action adrenaline of it, and and the way this track sort of evolves and sort of moves from one sort of point to another is obviously you've got David Arnold's sort of string arrangements, and obviously as part of the track, but otherwise it's huge.
Yeah, and it's actually multiple parts. Like there is the middle interlude, which is actually another John Barry track. I forget exactly what it's called, but it comes from You Only Live Twice at the beginning, where anytime they go into space, because the plot of the movie is Spectre is stealing all of the U.S. and Russian satellites, and anything that goes into space, Spectre steals, and they're trying to set off a war between U.S. and Russia because nobody knows who's doing it, and nobody's claiming responsibility, so they just assume the Russians and the Americans are doing it. So anytime they're in space and, Spectre stealing something, there would be this theme that plays, and it's just kind of this mysterious, kind of, spacey kind of theme, and it kind of, you wouldn't think it fits because On Her Majesty's Secret Service and You Only Live Twice have two different vibes. You Only Live Twice, I don't want to say a movie with an active volcano and ninjas and all of that is a relaxed movie, but it is a movie that takes its time getting to where it needs to go. And On Her Majesty's Secret Service gets really emotionally intense, because this is the one where James Bond finds the woman he loves, and also there is the second half of the movie, which is just one extended chase scene, and so the Propellerheads and David Arnold somehow managed to fit all of this stuff in on top of On Her Majesty's Secret Service. And it all weirdly works amazingly well.
Yeah, and particularly when it kicks back into On Her Majesty's Secrets, and you get this sort of building back up of the sound from the basically this very, very simple synth bass upwards, and it is
that bass line is insane.
And then you get big, and then there's bigger. bigger is sort of alongside better. It's just it's two. It's basically two, and it's a palate cleanser.
Yeah.
Because some of these tracks are long.
This one's better is because it has it kind of has the joke. It's like it has the voice sample of the guy going, "But bigger, my." And
yes, I can.
Yes, I can. So.
Yeah.
So that it kind of works better because it has a more memorable sample.
And it comes straight after On Her Majesty's Secret Service.
Yeah, so it needs a break after that. And one last note with On Her Majesty's Secret Service, you said how you played it through Grand Theft Auto. I played it, and this is probably too on the nose, in the middle of GoldenEye 007 sessions.
God. about the right period.
It's like my mom would like walk in and it's like, wow, is that actually coming from the game? Because I recognize that. And it's like, no, it's just this thing on the side. Well, it works better than the game you normally have, the music you normally have in the game. Which, not to, diss the composers of the GoldenEye 007 soundtrack. It's a perfectly fine soundtrack. It's just the sound quality with the N64 wasn't quite there yet.
Mm.
So you did the best you could. It's just
yeah, a simpler time.
simpler times with some, and there's only so much you could do. Meanwhile, there's a PlayStation where they had like, fully digitized songs and extra orchestras and some things, but we're getting off track again. It is what I do, and I apologize.
So then you get Coming to Get You. I think has the problem that it's sort of cemented between basically the two most memorable tracks on the album. But it's a good track.
It's a good track, and I think the Mouse Hunt movie had a good idea of how to use it as just ooh, it's a fun chase going on.
Yeah.
Because Spy Break is obviously more intense, and it was obviously used in a much more intense scene. But Coming to Get You just kind of has a chase vibe. It's not the big chase in the movie. It's not Bullet or Ronin where it's the biggest damn chase in the movie. But it's it's an okay. It's like the opening.
Yeah,
it's the opening of the movie chase, and you're just getting everybody oriented.
Here are your people. You can have a small chase as a treat. And then you have Spy Break.
Which is, the one people most heard, whether they know it or not. That's the thing with the Propellerheads. Regardless of whether you knew it or not, this was one of the most listened to bands of 1997 to 1999, just because they were in the background of so many things. You had There's Something About Mary, which was a surprise hit in America. Then you had Matrix, which was a surprise, insanely changing of the zeitgeist movie for a few years. And then you just had their other stuff on soundtracks like Bang On, which was from a movie that was there and disappeared, even though it was a hit movie. Lost in Space made money, but then everybody decided, looked at the critical response and let's not do this again.
Let's not. That nobody will speak of this again. Not even you, Gary Oldman. Why were you a spider again?
Which is weird because I feel like I want to bend over backwards and say nice things about that movie, because I liked the look of the movie aside from the awkward CGI, characters that were implemented. This was before Phantom Menace, and regardless of what you can say that is horrible about the Phantom Menace, and you can say a lot, the CG was excellent, and it was a standard bearer for how CGI characters are implemented, and Lost in Space is not.
It is the most 1990s film that ever 1990s.
Yeah, it was boomers nostalgia. Yeah, made by people who had no intention of following boomer nostalgia, but they didn't even have any idea of what they wanted to do.
As opposed to the people who did it now, who still apparently have no idea what to do. But at least it doesn't have a big band hip hop or a trip hop over it, apparently.
But then you have Spy Break, which is this super tight, super intense, super awesome song, and the Wachowski sisters, they knew what they wanted to do with that shit.
Yeah, it's obviously it is the scene in the Matrix with the I think it's called the government lobby sequence, and it is just, there are a lot of films that match you connect a piece of music to, but this is nigh perfect. Because it's got that sort of obviously the again, a lot of the tracks the Propellerheads do are very bass driven, and this has got probably the best bass groove on the album. It is absolutely unrelenting, and you just get this sense of energy throughout it.
Yeah, it is. It pushes you. The song pushes you, and you're just it is that thing that they need to go through as they're, obviously the scene has gotten more controversial, and there's been more talk about it because um, it is an ultra violent scene. And then Columbine came after with the people in their trench coats and the you know guns that shot up a school, and they were kind of sort of mimicking this, and it is kind of a scene where in movie they're saying they are killing actual people, and they have detached part of it, which is a part of being a rebellion. Like this was a lot of things when people were starting to pick apart like rebellious factions and what people did to go against them, and the kind of rules they had to pick apart. And I risk getting too political about it, but at the same time there was Star Trek Deep Space Nine, and they had this thing where this giant fascist space organization was taking over, and one of the people who were standing against them were the Bajorans, who led a rebellion against another like space fascist organization, people called the Cardassians, not the Kardashians.
Wow.
But one of the main characters was a former terrorist who had to the Cardassians were like under the thumb of this space fascist, and they're like, we don't like this, we want to get, so we turn to you, former terrorists that we hate. How can, and there was they had to teach them if you get gun shy about killing any place with civilians, they are just going to load up their military base with civilians, so you don't do it, and then what? Yeah. And so you just got to take them as traitors. And that's kind of what they do in the Matrix, is they take these people who have no idea what's going on as the enemy. But
yeah, I mean it's very much that 90s approach to sort of terrorist I mean, hell, Final Fantasy VII. You play, yeah. You are, at least 2 or 3 of your party are literally terrorists by the time you get out of the first level of the first city in Final Fantasy VII, and obviously it is this whole view of terrorism prior to obviously 9/11.
Mm-hmm. So it is weird times where rebellious terrorism is in mass media, but
and soundtracked by this,
which is a full force, kind of, it's full force, it's intense, but it's still a very fun song. Even though it has a quiet intensity, and it's it is on task, it is getting this shit done kind of song. So and then but I think one of my teachers had a good point. Is I think it focuses on the craftsmanship. It focuses on the pillars and all of the kung fu moves and their evasive action. So it kind of by focusing on that, it's palatable.
Yeah,
so,
and I think
anyway. I think
we've got off track with the Matrix. It is still
it's
you got to.
It's a really weird times as a person who has lived through the 90s and remembers every single bit of it. It is weird times, and is weird what we focused on, and what was this is okay, and this didn't bring up discussion until shit happened, and then now we have to discuss it because we had stuff that we got put in, didn't think anything of it, and then in the span of 2 years, shit got real, and now we have to talk about everything.
Yeah. But no, I think it is still. It's obviously, this is part of probably one of the best action sequences of the last 20, 30 years, which is kind of like this is basically this band's legacy. This band's legacy is, as it is for sort of a lot of bands who sort of are most famous for 1 or 2 tracks on soundtracks. I mean, hell, to an extent, prior to a certain part of a generation, Rage Against the Machine are principally famed for being, it's the song on the end of the first Matrix film.
And it's weird that there was like so much activism during a time when nothing was going on. I mean, there was stuff was going on, but according to the public, there wasn't much. I mean, the AIDS was the 80s. I mean, we had the Gulf War conflict, and then, you know, there was kind of this lull.
Yeah,
but they were still like weirdly dystopian stuff and things, and we were weirdly rebellious against whatever we had.
I think the 90s.
That's probably a discussion for another day.
And something. No, absolutely. And then obviously this is where the UK version ends, but on the US,
there is one more track at the end. I think it is a fantastic replacement for Echo and Bounces. You Want It Back, which is with the Jungle Brothers. And it is a track with lyrics, which, you know, this album was starving for. And I think it is a great way to end it because, like, certainly it is a "we're done here" track if there ever was one. Because just lyrical content and just how it feels. Because it just wanted to get everything out before it's over. Like this, the lyrics are. It goes from asides, like, obviously, like how awesome this song is and how awesome we are, but the main thrust of the track is like, when we were in a relationship, you weren't really interested in me, and now I'm off doing my own thing, and you're over here and you really want me back. And then there's this full force, and it feels like the thrust of the music is, I'm going to let this person have it, and we're going to be done. And that is a great way to end the album. So it's like there's all this stuff going on in his mind about, you know, this is driving me crazy. Leave me alone. Go away. And now we're done. I've got all this out, and we're done. And that
would prove to be
the track on the soundtrack.
And it would prove to be the end of the Propellerheads, because apart from like one or I think apart from a couple of tracks done for other stuff. So the last thing they released was Lethal Cut, which is basically something I can't even find any information on. It's another.
I've listened to the 2 discs 20th anniversary, and I can't remember it. They have like some deep cuts, and they have like some edits of their songs and stuff like that. And on the 2nd disc, they have the vocal tracks that were on the American release, but they shuffled it onto the 20th anniversary.
Yeah.
And the last thing I remember them doing is Crash, which was for the Austin Powers 2 soundtrack, and then it got on the BBC. And this is there's the version that's on Austin Powers is actually a remix of Crash, and there's the version we have that on the 20th anniversary is different from if you buy the Austin Powers soundtrack, which is usually something like a person like Moby would do. Like when Moby did soundtracks, every version he did, depending on the album, would be completely different. It would be mixed differently between how it fit with everything else, which is interesting.
Yeah.
And
that's it. That's all they did.
That's it. That's all you get. Yeah. I mean, the 20th anniversary stuff has about as much as you could hope to get, aside from a couple, deep cuts or some other things. But so if you get the 20th anniversary 2-disc set, you are getting 98% of what the Propellerheads had to offer you that was actually released.
Yeah. Which is sort of they feel very much like a band, a group that basically they did what they felt they wanted to do. And like you consider, the like half the tracks on this that aren't just the little sort of interludes are either on soundtracks, on adverts, because this is obviously Take California was used on the very first advert for a little thing called the iPod, which is sort of like hugely culturally significant.
Yeah.
But it's strange because these guys, left a fairly big dent on, late 90s culture, and
Yeah.
whether
They were there, and because, they could be used in so many commercial things, they, got they were everywhere. So,
Hmm,
I mean, regardless of whether you knew it or not, you knew their songs.
yeah,
And I mean, I wouldn't call them titans of culture. They were just, kind of, uh, you know, background organizers of culture.
yeah, and it's like neither of them seem to have done anything really since. Um, Apparently, according to this, one of the two, the gentleman White, the drummer, has done some stuff for mix things and as a collaborated with some musical project, but that's about it.
Mm-hmm.
And it's sort of really interesting to go from from sort of to from Weezer obviously last episode to sort of a band who just basically nobody knows anything about them. They did one record, then they went away again.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it's like, and they still had reach even when they were like, oh, this is all passe and this is all going to be done. Like, as far as when The Incredibles came out, their their music was still being used in 2004 on The Incredibles promotional stuff.
Hmm.
So, they were still there. People still love this, and they were still in need. I mean, I was surprised. There was a remix EP of the Incredibles soundtrack that had 3 different tracks on it, um, and I'm shocked as hell that Propellerheads weren't, because that's
Yeah.
was very much something they would have gone for, because it's like 60s retro with a new kind of vibe and verb, and they would have liked they sure as hell would have fit on there. And obviously they put Honor Majesty's Secret Service on the Incredibles stuff, so I'm surprised they just said they
Yeah.
weren't on that, and they weren't reached out for that. So, but you know they kind of saw that they kind of took their time trying to make a second album, and then when they were just making other people's stuff, um, they kind of took a while, and then suddenly their music what was popular changed, and then they had to and then what was big was, well, I wouldn't say big, but like the Low Fidelity All Stars, which was extremely dark disco. It was no longer, late 60s, early 70s. It was late 70s, and it was like post Vietnam, heavy stuff. And the Low Fidelity All Stars will probably be another story for another day. I'm sure
Yeah.
I will grab them, because they had like an incredibly original like debut album, and then their main talent decided they didn't want this, and then they left, and then suddenly the band turned from this extremely dark drug addled disco to Fatboy Slim knockoff.
Oh god.
Yeah, it's like it is an insanely different band in between one and the other. Man, if I could put 2 album suggestions in one, I would put like Don't Be Afraid of Love and How to Operate with a Blown Mind. I reversed them chronologically. I don't know why I did that, but listen to those back to back, and like same band.
But no, I still love this album. I still think it is probably, yeah, they did what they needed to do, but they've left us this, and you know, there are bands who've released 10, 15 albums that aren't this bloody good.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it is like the gap between, the what was mainstream, which was getting super poppy and fun, and then like what was going on in the electronic scene, which was, a little darker and less accessible. So it was a nice gap, and it was a lovely you know, just fun, rousing time. I mean, it's very hard to get too deep on this album because it is not a deep album at all. It's not one you listen and you absorb. It's not Kid A or anything like that.
No.
But it is, still a wonderful thing. You pop in and it gives you a good time and it just leaves you upbeat. And it was what electronic dance music needed because there was, there. I listened to a lot of the great bands at the time. Like Underworld was, they had their song from the Trainspotting soundtrack, but everything else was kind of, one of them was an abstract artist, so a lot of their stuff was abstract, and you had to like really think, and you had to be at 4 a.m, and you had to like let the just giant mass of like image poetry just seep in your mind for 10 minutes, and then like, oh, that's what this song is about, and which is less accessible. I mean, the only song Underworld like had that was, I absolutely knew what this was about, that was in pop culture, was their song off the Batman and Robin soundtrack, which was a man having a mental breakdown after a a breakup.
And that's just the audience of Batman and Robin.
Yeah. It is harsh. It is pounding into your face, like how the visual design of Batman and Robin. But you had that, and then you had The Prodigy, which they had some, tracks like Firestarter that got into the, pop culture here. But then, you had to pair them with songs like Smack Your Bitch Up, and then you had the, lead singer who, looked like a thinner version of the clown from Spawn. And then you had the Chemical Brothers, who are they had some insane beats that were heavily used in soundtracks, but they were Chemical Brothers. They were for clubs where you took something before you got on the dance floor. And then there was their albums, which controversial. The second half of Chemical Brothers albums drop off steadily.
Yeah.
So it's like the first half of the album are like some of the amazing things you have ever heard. Like even, post when they were big, like their first half of the albums were tight and they were good. And then you got the second half and it's just like, I forget I'm listening to music halfway into them because I am just so disengaged with it.
It's like that's like that image of Homer Simpson with all the bulldog clips just holding back the fat. It's just like, oh, okay, oh dear, it's got bad back there.
Yeah, and then you had bands like Left Field who they would show up on MTV Amp, and it's like, oh, that's a pretty okay song, but they never really cracked over here. I don't know what Left Field did over there. I mean, they were on some Wipeout soundtracks because most of these people showed up on Wipeout soundtracks.
Guinness advert, I think, most famously.
Mm-hmm. But it's, there's this bridge between the two, and they, fulfilled, a role that they got this, these infectious beats of these, British club stuff, but they didn't have like the eccentricity. They had this, sound that you could connect to because this is like, late 60s, 70s stuff that, is ingrained into pop culture regardless of whether you wanted it to be or not. It was just there because, that's what the people who are in control of the world were. And
yeah.
To be fair, a lot of it is really damn good stuff. So,
but being
it's not
on
like when the 50s revival came in, the songs were too lightweight and too short and too nothing to really get attached to something.
No, I'd agree there. The thing is that there is basically at the end of the day that you find me another band that sort of got on 13 tracks, managed to sort of have this many hits put in, and stuff that ended up on strewn across late 90s culture.
And yeah, no, it was just this giant flash in a pan, and it's really, I mean, I've come to understand it over the years, but it's like even people who know they are well beyond their functions release an album like after Be Here Now. I Oasis still got like standing on the shoulders of giants, even though they were like got very passe as the biggest band in the world, and they still worked from there. But it's just like the Propellerheads, they just stopped. They didn't. There was no fight. There was no tension, or there's just the world changes. We have to be done. Um, I mean, there was a part of me that thought it was they they had developed the software Reason, and they were just making money off of that. But then that was a Swedish company called Propellerhead Software. That was not the Propellerheads. I thought for the longest damn time the Propellerheads made Reason, and the big reason was, damn it, ADHD, stop that. But
That's
why they weren't is because they were. It was one of the earliest, at home make your own music programs, and it was big at the time that they were just making money off of that, and that's why. But no, the Propellerhead software in Sweden and the Propellerheads are two separate, different. That's not what it was. So it's just this, they decided the world passed them by and they just vanished.
yeah.
And I think we should probably vanish too, because I'm looking at the time, it's after an hour and 15 minutes.
Yes. So, obviously, last episode of the anime, we revealed what we're watching next time, which will be Fujiko and mine. But whose choice is it next for music? I think it's mine,
For
isn't it?
music, it's you. You
Oh,
got it.
right. So we're about to sort of delve into sort of the darker and weirder shit I'm into. Because next time we turn to early 90s Norway. And we turn to a band who really have sort of, defined the not only the genre they started in, but to the genre they've come to become one of the most interesting bands. And we are doing the first album by Norwegian band Ulva, called Bergetat. This is my Norwegian. I'm not going to murder this. I Jøventare in Capital, or Spellbound, a fairy tale in 5 chapters. So we're going some Norwegian black metal next time.
Okay. And I have behind the scenes, he has like changed what album he wants to do 5 times, so I have no idea what this is. And we'll see what happens.
Until next time.
Bye bye.